Okay, now we come to rules number 6 and number 7 because they sort of go hand in hand as well. And rule number 6 really goes to the issue of how people separate in conflict and how to learn how to do this with a minimum of conflict. And it's called pause the conflict. Taking a break during a conflict is okay when the following occurs. When one or both persons are too angry or too hurt to deal with the situation, when you're too tired to think clearly, when things are being rehashed over and over again with no resolution, and if you're going to call the time out, you need to call the time in and be clear when you'll be willing to return to the issue. Now, in general, and this does not mean to be sexist, but in general, in my experience, women tend to want to communicate more and men tend to want to communicate less. So when it comes to clarifying, women like to be able to clarify and sit there and communicate, and men frequently do not. Now, if that doesn't fit you, that's fine, but generally, one person or the other wants to communicate more, and the other person wants to communicate less. Rule number 5, clarification, is really designed to get people to communicate to come to the bargaining table, because when they don't, real problems occur. Then people start becoming proleptic because they make assumptions because they can't clarify. However, Rule 6 really favors those, and like I said, especially men, I think, who don't want to communicate as much when they feel overloaded, when they can't process anymore. And so they get to call a timeout when those things occur, when you're too angry, when you can't think clearly, when things are being rehashed over and over again. And the catch is this is the kicker to the end of it. Many guys, especially, refuse to let the person know when they're going to come back and talk about the issue. They just say, I don't want to communicate anymore, I don't want to talk about it anymore, and they kind of sweep it under the carpet. So this forces them to take responsibility for bringing it back up again, to say, okay, I'm going to call the time out, but I need to be able to call the time in again, because if I don't call the time in again, I'm not being fair. So if you want to pause the conflict, you say, listen, I'm really too tired, or I'm too angry, or I'm too frustrated to deal with this right now. I'd like to table this till tomorrow, and I promise you I'll pick it up again in the morning. And then when the morning rolls around, then you better make sure that you, in fact, do pick it up again. Otherwise, the other person's not going to be able to trust you. Okay? Rule number 7. And this kind of relates to rule number 6, because it's important to be mindful of physical and mental fatigue. This goes to the issue of how people skew their perception of relationships by filtering through their own physical and emotional states. So it's really important that you try not to deal with issues when you are physically or mentally run down, i.e. hungry, angry, lonely, tired, stressed, sick, sad, bored, restless, insecure, anxious, or nervous. What I call Halt's Brian. The first part I stole from AA because they talk about halt, hungry, angry, lonely, tired, but then I added the stress, sick, or sad. And then I thought about some other emotional and physical states. And I'm not saying these are the only. I'm saying that these are the major ones that people have to deal with. And the problem is, when you're in these physical or emotional states, people frequently filter their relationships through them. When people are sick, or when they're stressed in some way and they're having conflict with their partner or somebody close to them, they're oftentimes more likely to skew that other person to the negative, simply because of what they're going through in their own body. So it's really important to be mindful and be aware of physical and mental fatigue and other issues and other emotional states, so that you don't end up filtering your relationship through it. For instance, oftentimes when I find myself getting irritable with people, I have to take a step back and say, have I eaten anything recently? If my blood sugar is low, I'm oftentimes irritable. So oftentimes when I get something to eat, I'm less upset with the people around me as well, because I've taken care of my own body state. In this process, it's really important to not initiate an important subject before going to sleep at night. I oftentimes tell people that the bed is for 3 basic things: for sex, for sleep, and for late night comedy. And I say late night comedy because if you watch the news at night, you're likely to activate your reticular activating system, or if you get into a fight with your partner, your reticular activating system will kick in and you'll start pumping adrenaline and cortisol into your body, and you just won't sleep very well. I've had people on the verge of divorce because they had a fight at 3 o'clock in the morning that lasted all night long, and they didn't get a good night's sleep the next day, and they're about ready to divorce. And then a couple of days later, they get a good night's sleep, and all of a sudden they go, well, we don't know what we were fighting about. Well, a lot of it had to do because of the physical and emotional state that they were in. So it's really important for them to be aware of that and to get some sleep before you try to deal with conflict in the morning. And ultimately, rule number 7 deals with the concept of looking at your own perceptual veil first and your own current body state and taking responsibility for your mood and not blaming it on the other person. All right. We're going to go ahead and lump in rule number 8 at this point. Rule number 8, avoid becoming the volcano. Now, this goes to the issue of assertiveness, because people will sometimes stuff issues down and then things will come out in a laundry list. So discuss issues when they come up in the moment instead of becoming a volcano whereby you create a laundry list of hurts that come out during conflict. And really, this goes to the issue of bringing things up in the moment as expediently as possible rather than letting things fester inside. And it's really important that when you're bringing things up, that you do it up in a proper way, in an assertive way, instead of in a hit and run sort of fashion. And there's basically 4 types of hit and runs that I see. First is what we call on and off the table, where somebody will say, they'll say something and then you'll go, what? And they'll go, oh, never mind. It's not that important. And then the second person's like, what? Oh, never mind. What? It frustrates people when people put something on the table because it piques their curiosity and then they take it off the table. That's not fair. It's considered a hit and run. Secondly, the bait and leave, such as, I'm upset with you, John, and I'm going to go to the mall, and when I get back again, we'll talk about it then. And John's like, well, what are you upset about? I said, we'll talk when I get back. So that's leaving the person in suspense. Another way that people do is the dump and run, which is a person who comes and tells the other person off and then walks away without a response, refusing to let the other person even comment on what they said. And another one is like teasing or making a joke out of something serious and then denying it later. And people do these kinds of things to put stuff on the table but not really deal with them. Instead of saying, look, instead of going to the place of clarifying that says, look, I have an issue that I'd like to talk to you about directly. Instead, they try to come at it all these different angles. And oftentimes it's because people want the other person to read their mind. So don't expect others to read your mind, like we've said before. And the other thing is, don't mix apples and oranges. Mixing apples and oranges is like when somebody says, hey, I'm upset with you for leaving the cap off the toothpaste. And then the second person says, well, I was upset with you last week when you didn't pay the gas bill. Because those two things have nothing in common with each other. If you're both leaving the cap off the toothpaste, then by all means you get to bring it up at that point, because the other person is being hypocritical. But if it's not that, and it's something completely different, a different content area, then you really should have brought that up last week, or you shouldn't have let it go when you did. So it's really important to be assertive in your relationship, and as expediently as possible, bring issues up and put them on the table, and that way you get them out of the way. Next, we'll be going over rules 9 and 10.